Hey everyone, welcome to the first video of Cloud Learn X. Today we're gonna look at how to make your lesson slides great. So we want to try and look at how I make my lesson content engaging, interactive, and more effective. Yeah. So today we're gonna look at a lesson that I received. So I've made certain changes, improvements, and added certain things. Um, and today I want to share with you my thought process on why I made those changes and why I think it's going to work for online learning specifically. So right, so today's lesson we've got is positive and negative numbers. So we've got about 13 slides here. So I want to walk you through certain slides um, and see uh, why I've made those changes and why I've decided to go with that. So this basically is going to be a topic on positive and negative numbers, and the lessons were made for KS3, so Key Stage 3, so the London syllabus. Um, and yes, so do keep in mind that we do online lessons, and this is focused for one-to-one tutoring, and it's more of a two-way learning process. So it's not going to work for scenarios which is sort of like a lecture. So that's not what we are looking at here. We're looking at one-to-one tutoring where we want the student to actively participate in the learning process. And yes, so with that in mind, we're trying to make effective slides. Okay, so right, looking at the introduction slide, this is where we'll do our first assessments on where the student stands. Does he or she know about the positive and negative numbers? Maybe try and find out whether the student knows where we come across negative numbers. Does he or she know about how to compare them and things like that? And, so I generally like to keep my introduction slides as simple as possible, which is a good thing that I've seen here. It's very basic, allows us to have a discussion, right? But sometimes I also like to have certain visual cues. So that would engage a discussion among students. So maybe I would ask a student like, where have you seen negative numbers in real life? So having some visual cues, maybe a thermometer, maybe could be like seasons or just something indicating seasons and things like that, would allow the student to start a conversation, which is a good way to start off a lesson. But generally I like this because it's blank. It's a pretty basic topic, so it allows some more. So I haven't changed this one. I'm gonna go with this. Right, let's just go. Okay, so we are going to start with this one. Right, so I also noted something like what we generally like to do is follow this format. So we first have try this question. So we give a question for the student to try, right? So this would allow us to see where the student stands. Now, if the student is capable of doing this independently, so that gives us a better idea on how we have to progress with the lesson. So it's going to be pointless to repeat the concepts and things like that if we know for sure that the student already knows this and is confident with that. So generally we would like to have a try this question to start off to see if where the student stands. So I like this. Pretty simple. just want to keep the negative numbers on a number line. So yeah. And then what we do is we follow up with where you go through it. So based on how the student did this, we would use this one, right? Yeah, so I like this. It tells you the concepts. Here's where all the concepts are discussed. And like that, you've done 2 points and given all the necessary information. A little bit of guidance over here. That's handy for sure, to give something to start on for the student. And then we follow up with a your turn, where once we've taught the concept, once we've had a discussion, we would test the student on how well if he's grasped it. So here, what I've noticed is that, okay, so we've tried this question where we want to place -7 and -3 on the number line, right? And then once we've discussed the concept, right, so we have a pretty similar question to this where we ask the student to try it. So generally, when we have a your turn where we want an application question, I look for a few things in my slides. So I want to make it, first I would like to make it challenging. So we tried something, we learned the concepts, and we don't want to repeat the same question that we had there. That's gonna be, so generally I would like to make it a little more challenging, right? Number 2, I also like to associate something, a real life application, somewhere we could apply this, right? It's not always there, so maybe it's something really simple, like in this case, maybe applying a real life application to this question may not be ideal, but generally I would like to work on those lines to make it a little more challenging, to test the student, test different areas to make sure that the student has grasped what was discussed here. So I did make a few changes. This is a small change. So let's go to that slide. Okay, so instead of comparing or placing the two numbers on a number line, I've given the student 4 numbers, right? And if you notice, the number line I've given the student, I haven't given these boxes, I haven't marked 0, I haven't given those segments marked. Okay, so I decided to remove that so that I could challenge the pupil. So when the pupil sees something like this, there's several things. First of all, he's gonna be okay. He has to be a little more proactive to see, okay, where am I gonna mark my negative numbers, how do I mark my positive numbers? So the student starts to think about, okay, where do I start, right? And so a lot of questions are going to come up when we have this difference, right? And having a few different numbers. And remember, the concept is still the same, right? We're trying to place numbers on a number line, but the student here has to have an idea on where the negative numbers and the positive numbers split, right at 0, right? So instead of providing that part directly, we just challenge the pupil to think about that. That gets some connections with how the negative and positive numbers are split. And then also when we looked at this, the student would have to also use to try and figure out where each number goes based on the size. So that's something that's a little change, but very effective when it comes to one-to-one tutoring online. Right. Next, I'm going to go back to what we got. Okay, here's another try. So remember, it always goes like try question, um, go through it where we discuss the concept, and then an application question. So it goes in threes, right? So again, when you're talking about a new concept, you go with try, concept, apply. So I think this is a really good um, format or a structure to lesson slides that I've used a lot, and it's given really good feedback from the students. Okay, so here's that. Right, I like this. I haven't made changes to this one. It's a basic question. You want to compare two different numbers, and I think they've got a good mix of questions here. Positive, positive, negative, negative, negative. So comparing those numbers, that's good. What I want to look at is this concept slide, right? So, right, when you look at this visualization, I think it's really, it's good, right? It sort of tells you that this visual gives us an idea of the number positives getting bigger when you go to your right, and how the value gets smaller when you go to your left. But um, for me, with concept slides, what I like to do is um, make it really to the point, right? I want to make sure that the right concept goes into it, right? So instead of having sort of like shortcuts, if that makes sense. So the concept slides, the main purpose of a concept slide is to pass on the exact concept. So instead of having this visualization, which might also be confusing if you think about it really well, it's not the digits that's getting bigger, right? So what I would have liked is to make things a little more straightforward when it comes to concept slides. So what I did was made a simple change. Just drew the arrows, use a bit of gradients to show that it's, increasing, value decreasing towards your left. And I think even the colors associating with warm and cold is a good way to go. And I think it's very simple. It just serves the purpose of passing on the concept. So I think this visual of using basic arrows, direction, and just a simple phrase works better when it comes to concepts. Um, so I think this does a better job in that. So that's why I made that change there. Okay, so let's move on. Right, so this one was interesting. So this is the application question. So we discussed about how to compare numbers, and right, so the question here is comparing the temperature of two different cities. I like this. One, because it's trying to associate the real life application, sort of to find out associating negative with temperature. And yeah, so it helps the student use this math in day-to-day, associated with day-to-day things, right? Like temperature, like weather, things like that. So that's a really good thing to do, and I generally encourage that. But here too, I think I thought we could do better, right? So let's just see what I've done there. Right. Okay, so I've done two major changes. One is that instead of comparing two different cities, I've included several. Purpose for this is to try and get the student to compare negative and positive temperatures, negative and negative temperatures, and things like that. So this application problem, another um, purpose of coming to an application problem is to try and um, sweep through all possible misconceptions. So you want to try and test the student across different ranges, different types of misconception. Does the student know how to compare a negative number and a positive number? Um, and so on. So you want to test out different things. That's why I've introduced several cities instead of just two. Another thing, obvious one, is to include that map. From my experience, I think, especially the primary students, having this map just does that extra thing of getting them involved and interact. They just like having that, they are more interested in trying this out, trying to solve and find out, ordering these cities, when that is sort of like a visual thing, right? They might they seem a little more excited than having, for example, if I could have easily had a small table here with the cities and list out the temperatures. But from my experience, I've found out that they respond really well when they have images. And seems like, especially the primary students, uh, they sort of feel sort of a more sort of like a more accomplishment when they try and do this. Seems more real, if that makes sense. So that's what I was going for here. Yeah. A simple change, you would say, but it does help with the engagement part and also identifying any misconceptions. Uh, right. Okay, we'll go back. So that's what we did there. Okay, so again, we go for try this question format. So we've got, yeah, we're coming to where the student tries to add negative numbers using a number line. So I think this is, yeah, I don't think I've done any changes here. It's a pretty simple question. Here also, I would like to talk about the concept slide. I think this is where I made certain changes. Right, let's just look at this. So it makes perfect sense. Starting number, the direction and the number of steps to move in a number line. And then, this slide gives you all that happens, right? So start over here, 3, move 3, and things like that. So it's all right, but I made a few changes here. So we'll just have a look at that. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna ignore the most obvious for now. I'm just gonna ignore this. I'll tell you why that was added. I'm pretty sure you've already figured it out, but yes, a subtle change would be what I did over here. I've removed all those guidelines, I've removed that. I've removed the annotations, the arrows, and the steps marking all of that. I've removed that, right? And I've just mentioned something important. Adding a negative number decreases the value, which is the main concept around this question, right? So I've been very, very straightforward with how you do it, but not very straightforward. I haven't really given anything on how you would do the rest of it, like the exact process. I've only given you the concept. So this is something really, really important that I've seen a lot of tutors missing out on, especially when they create their slides. So in a concept slide, you don't want to make things boring, right? And you want your student to make those connections on how things happen by themselves. That's the best part, the most effective part of learning, right? You don't want students to commit things like these, working with number lines, to muscle memory. Just remembering how to skip those, how to jump those, how to jump the number line. It shouldn't be part of muscle memory. That's something I always encourage. Just give out the concept and get the student to create that link or that relationship with the concept and the process by themselves. That's what learning is all about. So I would just allow this over here, have a basic number line, and just guide the student. Maybe a few questions like, where are we going to start from? Could you mark where we're going to start from? So based on the concept, which direction do we have to move? How many set steps do we have to take? So those questions you could always promote, but allow the student that learning space, that independence to do it by themselves. That's important. Even though we're trying to give out the concept here, that's the best way to give out the concept. Right, now the most obvious one, the image, which is something I really like as well. So here it's basically a drink. You're adding ice cubes to it. So the basic idea is that, okay, when you have a drink, ice is like negative numbers. And when you add ice, when you add negative numbers, what happens to the drink? It gets colder. It goes less and less. The temperature drops down, goes down, right? So I think that's a really nice way to get the student to think about negative numbers and positive numbers and what happens to the value, associating with something in real life. Right, so making that little image and having a small discussion around that, so helps the student remember this along the line, right? So I used to remember back in the day when we did this about adding and subtracting negative numbers, we used to have this memorized, right? We did different signs, subtract, goes down. Same sign, it's if it's negative, it's you add it. So if it's the same sign, you basically add, right? So something like that, if I do remember. We had that, we wrote it behind our books in the pages, we memorized it, we committed that to memory, but we did not have an association with, you know, how, like, if we forgot that, right, we would be confused and we would stuck right at that question and we wouldn't be able to go ahead, right? We would be lost, right? Just because we couldn't remember that rule. We learned it as a rule. Instead, if we promote associating things with real life, right, that stays on for longer, and that's more, I would say, more a productive way to pass concepts, right? Right, so that's about it. That's the major changes I've done to this lesson, these lesson slides. I think that should make it much better, and we will find out. I'll be doing more of these reviewing and improvements, and also we'll come up with videos looking at different aspects of online learning. So that's what we do. Right then, so that's I'm gonna wrap up here. I hope you learned something from this. Do subscribe and like the video. Okay, goodbye.